everyone. Susan Bacchus here. I'm here this evening for another in our series of NVN Reflections, the sixth or seventh in our series, I think. And I'm here tonight with Barbara Harris. And Barbara has been kind enough to volunteer to tell us a little bit about her life, and an interesting one it was. Barbara, would you just like to sketch where you came from and how you got to Philadelphia?
All right. I got to start with my parents because I can't I can't deny who they were. My dad was a professor of art history at Göttingen University in Germany, and he began to see the writing on the wall with his Jewish mother. The whole Holocaust thing was looming there, and he had a happy chance to get to this country in 1936, along with a wave of immigrations, to a visiting professorship at Madison, Wisconsin. So I was born in Madison shortly after they settled, and I had an older brother, age 4. My mother came along on that trip as well. They were married, and I was very happy to have her. I'm happy to tell you about her a little bit because both were really great influences in my life, and positive ones. I'll go on from there. When I met Bob, it was in Honolulu, in Hawaii. And those circumstances are too complicated to tell, but he was there teaching, and I was a grad student. And there were complications, but we got together. And then I went off to Europe for a year on my own. And Bob patiently waited back here and learned a lot of patience in those couple of years. And he's learned a lot since. So he and I were married in 1972. Our daughter was born in 1974. And our little son came along in 1975, 1978, whatever it was, plus 6. We settled in Michigan. We didn't mean to settle in Michigan. He was a student and hoping to get out of there with a PhD. But we were at MSU and found all kinds of really interesting things in that community. Very internationally minded, and good music department. Wow, it was really, really grew while we were there. And that's our club. And so my focus of my talk is all going to happen in the past of that as well. I'll leave it at that. That's how I got it. Well, how I got her was because of Bob. After he retired, we came here to Philadelphia to be closer to both of our children. And our daughter had 2 grandchildren by then, so hey, there's the draw.
Lots to visit here. Well, thank you. That's helpful. And a wide span, it suggests, from Germany to Hawaii. Tell us about your young years.
Oh, my young years were happily spent in a small town where you feel very comfortable all the time with everybody. And my classmates, I think I seemed like I was a little different because my mother she didn't dress me very fancy or anything. I went around in those poodle skirts that we all did in the 50s. And I didn't stand out at all, I don't think, in my childhood, but this incredible opportunity I'm going to tell you about today happened right toward the end of my high school years. And so that's my house school career.
Okay. You tell me when you're ready for more pictures.
Oh, you're taking a pause?
Well, no, I will turn on the pictures when the subject turns to that.
Okay, all right. All right, I'm going to introduce, I'm just going to say going to Vermont now, and then finding, are they finding me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
You in.
Now?
Oh, all right. This adventure occurred quite by chance. I had skipped a grade in school, and so I was a year ahead of myself, and graduated in 1954. Lots of things still going on in the 50s. It didn't in the 60s, etc. But my parents had heard about the Trapp Family Singers because they were they were pretty much at the height of their popularity about then. So many people know Sound of Music but have no background for it. And I'll be tempted to tell you too much, but I do want to bring you up to date just a little bit. The family was large. They were eventually 10 children. And they had some time adjusting to being in the States. And I told Susan about this little incident. Mother Trapp, as I called her, Maria wasn't supposed to, but she found herself pregnant for another time on American soil, and by her husband, I think. And she was afraid if she let this be known, they would be sent back by the very fragile alliance they had with their agent and their sponsoring agent. And sure enough, that's what happened. But it wasn't her looks that gave her away, because somebody suggested to her, you only look pregnant if your bust is larger. and so she had a series of underwear made that was progressively larger to try to minimize that look. And then she spilled the beans herself to the management. And sure enough, right away they sent them home. That was the end of a contract. And so there they went back to Europe. All now 10 children. Oh, I'm trying to imagine going back and forth on the ship under those circumstances. But they found new sponsorship, which they stayed with them, which they stayed with the rest of probably 30 years of making music and touring for at least 20 of those years. So I think it's important to show you the family. So I've got a series of pictures here Susan will find. Here we go. This first picture is of Maria herself. That's how she really looked. And the story, as you know it, in Sound of Music, has been fairly accurately told about how she wanted to be a nun, and the family pulled her away as a nanny, and she turned out to be a natural tomboy with those kids. They just loved her. And the rest of that is a piece of history. No, they came here, all this adventure began actually afterwards, but this is how I knew her, probably whatever, in her mid-50s or something. Beautiful woman in a very different way. This is a picture of all of us. This is our concert attire. We had 2 different outfits for concerts, and I am smack in the middle. You see, Father Vosner is our director in front of me, and behind his second son, Kurt, whose name is really Verna.
Perhaps you could fill in how you came to be singing with them. We didn't get to
will.
that.
I will.
Okay.
Yeah, as soon as we do this, we'll do it very,
Okay.
fairly quickly. I love this picture just because I love that angle for my face, and I like that the fact that it shows you we sang mostly a cappella, but we also used the elderly instruments, viola da gamba and a little spinet. And we played recorders, which you see in the next slide. Well, there's a recorder on the right-hand side. On the next slide, yeah, that was our quartet for the recorder. That's Verna on the left, the second son, me, Mitzi. This was Maria also, but they called her Mitzi the whole time I was in. When Mother died, she could go back to Mitzi, to Maria. And Johannes was their youngest son, who was about a year younger than I.
They got taller as they got.
And very tall, yeah.
Yeah.
This is a little poi lesson, a poi dance lesson in New Zealand, which we had a beautiful little costume on the child, native child. Those the skirts are made not of grass, but of it's called flax, and they twist it so that when collectively they make a nice kind of clicking noise when you move. We found a troupe that gave us lessons. And this is me on the left with a bass recorder in my hand, and Maria, and 3 Australian school children. We sang to thousands and thousands of children.
Wow.
And I thought this picture just captured all the innocence of that.
Yes.
And this is me, being a new friend, a koala friend.
A koala
The
bear.
koalas that you could hold in the sanctuary. Really sweet.
They look so cuddly. I'm glad to hear you could hold them.
Yeah. Oh, the fur is just fantastic. Lots of toys made of their fur. And that's my 18th birthday in Adelaide, in Australia. That was the last time.
Okay.
My cheesecake picture, I called it. Such as it was in those days.
So,
Shall I? Yeah.
would you like to? Yes.
Yes, go on.
Fill us in.
Well, when the big stories around when I got hired by them, when they took me on, and that's just briefly. I missed my audition. I had gone back up to the camp because just because people knew them better at the time than we do now, and of course now they're all gone. So I went back, and I was on a partial scholarship in camp. They had a 10-day sing week in the summers for people, and then we were the crew that cleaned up in between sets of people that came. We had those few days of completing the second week to put everything together for a new group. Lots of work. I discovered what a fantastic work ethic the family had. They came, after all, from not professional musicians, but they just came off the land themselves. They lived in Austria, as you know, and they were not any particular royalty. They were just they were the Baron, by the way, Baron von Trapp. They were so proud of, because that was bestowed upon Baron. at some point in his very heroic working days. He was one of the very first commanders of a submarine back when they were brand new and horribly dangerous, of course. And he survived it all. And he's written a book as well about this. His granddaughter translated it. Very nice, just a journal. Let's see, where was I?
You were on scholarship at the camp.
Thank you. That was it. I'm skipping generations around, trying not to do that too much. We worked hard in the dorms and played hard. We swam at a waterfall fed Bingham Falls. I've never been so cold in my life, but I loved it. And, I was a pretty difficult teen. I was learning all kinds of stuff at once. I'd never had a boyfriend in my life, so that wasn't a problem, but it was a little bit, it became a little bit of a problem. And then I went back home and thought nothing of it, but a wonderful experience. And went back at Christmas time that year, and unbeknownst to me, they were looking for a replacement. Can't say replacement, she'll never be replaced, for the youngest daughter, Eleanor, who was just one of the most gorgeous women I've ever seen. I could hardly take my eyes off of her. And she announced that she was going to be married in June of the following year. And that was the June I graduated from high school. So I guess they invited me for Christmas because I think they wanted to study me a little bit more to see what I could do, how fast I could work, not only peeling potatoes in the kitchen, but reading music and stuff. And sure enough, they asked me that while I was peeling potatoes. They asked me to come rehearse with him for New Year's, Christmas Eve. And it was so incredibly exciting, but I picked myself up, said, you could do this. And it turned out to be a whole Christmas, a whole mass of Mozart that we rehearsed that afternoon and then sang it the next night for Christmas Eve. So I had to prove myself, and I guess I did. I didn't know right away that I had no idea this was an audition. That was a big surprise. And so life went on, and I went back to home afterwards, and no, I didn't go back home afterwards. No, the key to this story really is that I slept through the wake-up call for the Christmas Eve, because we all went to bed before, and I was putting out of a lot of energy those days. Just slept so hard that I slept through the wake-up call for the mass and missed it completely. So I missed my audition, unhappily not knowing that's what it was. But when I went back home, I got a note from Mother Trapp in her bold handwriting and said, would you like to come and sing with us on tour? And I dropped my jaw and replied and talked to the college where I had been applying. And they said, sure, we'll wait for you. So I did. That's what happened.
And where did you go when you sang with them?
Well, the first tour I did was in the States. And that was an education in itself, because we went north to south, east, pretty much east, but then we ventured into the Midwest and places that were a little more familiar later. But this wrench of the separated bathrooms and things was just really hard on me. I became very emotional about some of those things. And I a lot of little details about rehearsals and things there.
You mean segregated bathrooms?
Segregated bathrooms
Yeah,
still in 54.
Yes. Okay.
And Father Vosner came out of a common bathroom with us, the priest who was their director, and said, "Oh," he said, "this one was coal. What do we call it? Coal.
Both sexes?
I can't think of it. It was a coal bathroom for men and women. Oh, wait, whatever that word is." But funny. So then I moved on. Happening, many wonderful things happened on that tour, but the South North thing was great. Yeah.
You must have learned a lot of music.
Well, yeah, that had to. We did everything by memory, and it wasn't too hard for me in those days. And I think I didn't mention that I played the recorder, so I worked with that small group, and we put together an instrumental group for every concert as well.
And did I hear you say you went on tour in Australia also that year?
Well, I think they debated about little old me for quite a while. And finally, Mother decided I possessed enough maturity to make their very large last overseas tour, which turned out to be to New Zealand and Australia. We were 3 months in each country.
Oh my.
And I learned so much. In New Zealand, our focus was the Maori people that fascinated us all. We learned quite a bit about their culture, and we learned to dance. You saw me with a little New Zealand girl in the picture. We learned this poi dance, it's called. Nothing to do with the poi in Hawaii. And in Australia, we met some of the native animals, and I loved it. you saw me with the koala that was there. There's so much to tell about those, but we're not going to have time now. Come see me later.
And I gather this sort of influenced the rest of your life.
Yeah, it certainly did. I tried to write this down the other day. What does one learn as a teenager with that kind of I decided I learned friendliness to everyone, and you're more likely to get a friendly response if you're friendly first. Duh. Patience with all kinds of things, the waiting around, and sometimes a stage that was uncomfortable, all kinds of things. Be kind to all. Be kind to all, especially those with whom you live. I'd never experienced the 4 of us, 5 of us turned out. Learn to state your appreciation for favors. And what else was it? Grateful. Be grateful for all we ventured with. Being grateful just to be around and alive and well after all those adventures. That's what. Yep.
Well, that's a wonderful initiation into adulthood. I think that's monumental.
If we have time, do we have time?
We have 5 more minutes.
Oh, good. Oh, good. My adulthood is much longer than that, but it doesn't take as long to tell. Yeah, I have this little heading on my notes about life since has not been quite so exciting. It's hard to beat that. Maybe meeting Bob was one of those highlights, though.
Yes.
And probably the 2 kids were highlights. fortunately, Bob loves to travel too, and we did a good deal of traveling, mostly European countries. I could tell you more detail, but I can't right now. Portugal was one of our favorite places, so big in the news now. And Croatia. Croatia we were in because I have a nephew who lives in Istria on the peninsula of Croatia. So we got to know the far east of Europe for quite a bit, traveling through and realizing how my background is similar, but we all have our special our specialties. Each country has their own flavor. Slovenia was a big surprise for me because they're such an educated country, and they're kind of a key to all the learning that happens in Europe. And just several examples. Oh, I didn't mention that I met Bob in Hawaii. He's from South Dakota, as many of you know, and I was raised in Oberlin in Ohio. And but I went out to Seattle for grad school. I was part of a very small music history department, very happy out there, wonderful people around me. And Bob had signed up to be a beginning teacher out there. He was working on a doctorate, but at that point he'd finished his master's, and so he was eligible, but it was a 3-year contract for him. So we met. I had been married before. So again, he had to work on some patients, and I had no idea he was going through all this. I was going through my own thing, but the divorce was a distant one because my husband then was in Seattle and I was still in Hawaii. So suddenly I was on my own, had to figure out how to make a living for a couple of years. And I just lucked out a wonderful teaching job at a tiny little college on Maui. It was just wonderful. And then happily, without any understanding of why, I won a Fulbright to go back to Germany to study. So those 2 years between marriages were just fantastic for me. Quite a contrast to each other. But I tried to make the most of everything. And of course, the music was a key to a good part of it. In Hawaii, I was still working on my master's degree. And the day that I passed the master's degree is memorable to me because we went out a couple years later and finally finished. So I don't know what can follow our travels. We just really loved our travels. We did share a few other things, but
well, that's wonderful. And
and we were in Japan and China on different kinds of trips and things too. We happened on those, but the meaningful one was where you live a while, and with a couple of clubs, travel clubs, if you will, who where you stay with families along the way.
nice.
And that was a wonderful experience. We loved it.
Well, I'm glad you found your way to Philadelphia. And I'm glad you found your way to NVN.
Happily. Yeah, Bob's always got his feelers out, and he actually began all that for me. So,
and we appreciate his service to the organization. And I want to thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Happy to do it. Happy to do it. I think it's time to stop and ask questions. And there's so much to tell, but I'd be very happy to start the question business. And if no questions, we'll go on just ad living. Dave.
I have a question. When you finished your tour with the Von Trapp family and went back to your formal education, is that what you did?
Well, this was between high school and college, basically.
Yes. So when you came back, then you started your college.
And I started it over, but I had a couple years out because of the timing of fall tour, and then the timing of the second tour was to the countries down under have a different schedule, a different climate schedule too. So their summer was our fall, was our concert season. And that extended over through Christmas down there. I missed the beginning of the next year as well, college year. So it was a couple years out, and the last 6 months of those 2 years was a totally different experience. Very good for me. Very bring her back down to earth experience. Namely being a nurse's aide in a children's hospital. That's where I was able to indulge that bit of my interest.
Any other questions?
Ellie, I'm sorry we haven't met, but here we are. Yeah.
You're muted.
Yep. I actually had 2 questions. One real quickie. Did you both sing and play the recorder? Is that right?
Right.
You did both.
Right.
And I didn't quite catch how you went to Interlochen and that's where you met. No.
Oh, well, my parents could have sent me to one of those schools, but I think they saw them as just more competitive, which I'm sure is true. Interlochen is highly competitive now.
So how did you actually get into the group?
No, the family just simply confided about me. I mean, must have talked about me because their youngest daughter was getting married that same summer. I graduated high school, and she was a huge asset to the group. They asked me to try to fill her shoes for the year. And as it turned out, it was their last year of touring because most of them had just had it by then. They had no life of their own, 20 years more or less in this kind of an atmosphere. And the summers were busy for them too because of this camp. So they are the most hardworking. They were the most hardworking people I could imagine, putting it all together. Not a lot of breaks.
So the Trapp family actually ran a music camp in the summer, and Barb's parents thought that would be a good experience for her, and so they sent her to the music camp. Did you go for 2 years, 2 different summers?
Yeah,
2 different summers, and during those summers there is when the Trapp family, it turned out, they were kind of watching her because they could see that she had a lot of musical talent and ability. And so then when it came time for the one daughter to get married, they realized they had to replace her in the family singers.
Mm-hmm.
So that was when they asked Barb to.
Well, actually, about the first one was my introduction to the camp.
Yes.
And the second one was the invitational because by then they had asked me in the spring. They asked me to come, and so as part of my little show and tell stuff, they have this note in Mother's old handwriting saying, "Would you come? We need." And so it was just a fluke. But they needed somebody like me at the time, I guess, because they didn't have a lot of money by then. They really spent their money on the trips too. They weren't well paid. I mean, things have changed so radically since then. Anyway, you realize how little even the great artists. I don't know what kinds of salaries they made, but I was paid for toothpaste and a couple of necessities. That's about all I made. But it was the adventure, of course, for me that was, and my expenses paid, of course. By then.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was done for sure. Yeah.
Right, she can.
Yeah, so
You're muted, Hope.
yeah, you're muted. You're off mute.
She is.
Was it hard to adjust to just being college student after all that excitement of traveling?
What a wonderful question. It wasn't in that I already loved Oberlin. There were many things for me to care about Oberlin that it was exciting to be there at last too in my life. And the disappointment for me was the day of graduation when I had visions all of my life of watching this wonderful procession. We have a central courtyard kind of thing, and the professors in their caps and gowns, and we in our new caps and gowns go traveling, walking along these paths. And the day I graduated, poured rain. Poured rain. So we had to stay inside all the time. Not a big deal, but you're right. It was quite an adjustment to come back, and I didn't know whether my fellow students would have any interest. And actually, nobody talked about it very much. I think people asked a little bit about it, but not much. And in your same age group, it's not that big a deal. Maybe, I don't know. There's such a contrast between the 50s, mid 50s, to now. And when kids are touted, when they are talented like that, get snatched up into a whole different world. And I knew I was never going to be a professional anyway. So I enjoyed myself. I had a good freshman year in Glen. It was a subtle question and probably a subtle answer as well, because you take one day at a time wherever you are. Lucy?
So I know you and I talked about your teaching that came later, but could you talk about what you did after you came back from your fabulous experience traveling the world with the Trapps?
And after college.
And after college, of course, yeah.
Well, actually, before college, I had this half year of being a nurse's aide, which brought me back down to life, as it really is. That was a growing up experience in itself. With children, I was attached, but not too attached. I learned that kind of, attachment, detachment that school teachers need to have too, of course. And I did a lot of growing in very different ways in my career. The 4 years at Oberlin were fine. I fell in love my sophomore year, my ex-hubby, and I was married at the end of those 4 years and put him through medical school in Cleveland, Ohio. We were in Cleveland, Ohio. And then we were in Seattle, Washington for his training. And then we were in Honolulu, Hawaii. That's how I got to Hawaii. And I was living in Hawaii. Nothing, for the first time, he could take a break from work. And we did a little bit of looking around in Hawaii, as one ought to do. But mostly hardworking folks, I picked him out of the crowd. Bob was one of them too. He was teaching English when I got there as a young English instructor, and we were so giving. He was my student in my classroom, but he wasn't having to earn a grade. Thank goodness. He was just auditing the class. So that was a good thing. I didn't have to, no big deal.
I'd like to add, I didn't break up a marriage.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't break up a
Oh,
marriage.
that's true. I guess that sounds like it might have. No, another lady broke up the marriage, and that was, just like everything else. Actually, those 2 years between marriages were two of the most exciting I had. And one of them was teaching at this little tiny college on Maui. The whole story to be written about that college, it is just marvelous. I was one of 17 faculty members, and we were, and our president was trying to get it going as a 4-year college, as a 4-year, what do they call that? Certified, whatever. And we were in the last year, but it didn't turn out. And so the 17 of us really bonded toward the end of that college time, because we knew we had to leave, we knew we had to disperse. And that was a lesson in itself too. And then, but the following year, happily, I had applied for a Fulbright. And I got it, much to my surprise. I got the Fulbright. So somebody said, you probably don't have as much competition on Hawaii as other places. Very likely that was the case. And I made the most of them. I enjoyed life and also worked hard on a Fulbright in Germany. So I had been a German minor in school and brought the language back up for my classes and things there. My parents, by the way, became American citizens. I wasn't sure, but they couldn't wait to leave Germany behind them. My grandmother was Jewish. My father's mother was Jewish, and he would have been really in trouble over there. So he was so, the timing on everything was beautiful. And then I married this guy, and we're living on a shoestring, but he loves to travel as much as I do. So we had plenty of wonderful travels together. That's what I'm going to miss now that I'm not as capable health-wise. Yeah. But you want to say more about it?
Okay, any further questions?
I would just add something that I think she kind of didn't emphasize, is that her parents were both extremely musical, and the whole family was musical. Her dad was a fine pianist, very fine pianist, and also a conductor of an orchestra in Göttingen.
And had lessons as a violist.
And yes,
key.
and her mom played the cello. No, she's a violist.
She was a
violinist.
violinist. She was a violinist. Yeah.
And then her brother was a cellist, and this was a family that played string quartets in the living room.
We did, yeah. Well, I played the flute.
Yeah.
Mozart wrote some pieces for flute quartet, as he did for oboe quartet. And they say he didn't like the flute as much. He didn't care for the flute as well. So there's not much repertoire.
So she really came by the musical aspect of all of this very naturally, and grew up in a family where, as Barb would say, she didn't. Her mother didn't emphasize go clean your room or go do the dishes. It was go practice. Do your music. That was what.
I do some version of that still.
So,
All right.
What were you teaching when Bob was in your class, auditing your class?
That's a good question. It was a college university class in music appreciation. And so I worked with. I was a postgraduate assistant to our most brightest, all around brightest musician and music history person. He was a specialist but he was raised in the Philippines. He was in the Philippines, Filipino background. And we had several Filipinos there. So he brought a great deal of variety, and he's since been the director of the ethnic group. They have expanded their repertoire of instruments just incredibly there. I've been back once to visit. We had wonderful, well, not a couple more times than that, but.
So I was able, as a faculty member at the University of Hawaii, I was able to take classes free. And so I said, I'd like to audit this class. She was the lab instructor. And so I'll tell you the story since we have just enough time. So she walked in the front of the room and I looked at her and I said, now there's the woman for me. And I said that, of course, to myself. And then I looked down and she had a ring on her finger and I said, all the good ones are taken. And I didn't think any more about it until the following summer, fall, whenever it was. And she was, and a colleague of mine in the English department was driving by and stopped. And I said, where are you going? He said, I'm going out to the airport to pick up a friend who's flying in from Maui. You want to ride along? And I did. And the person he was picking up was Barb. And he had been.
I kind of remember you. I said.
he had been in her first wedding. And so he knew her well. So that was kind of the side story about
her Bapticar. I think they were.
That's wonderful. I'm glad we got that on tape.
Can I ask you if you know? Oh, yeah. If you know Herb Aptekar, he was the head of University of Hawaii.
What was his name?
Aptekar was his last name. No, maybe not there at the same time.
Probably since my time.
Oh, he's older than I am. But he was the dean. He was the dean of the school of the University of Hawaii and a good friend's father, actually. Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, my major advisor was Dr. Vaught, Raymond Vaught, who played the gambas, interested in early music. I wrote my thesis on it's so abstruse.
And our daughter graduated from Oberlin.
Oh, really?
Nice. Oh, did she?
Yeah.
Did you wonderful along the way?
Yeah. Did you major in music in Oberlin? I mean, Oberlin has a famous conservatory.
Yeah.
Did you major in music?
Yeah. Did you major in music?
I wasn't in the conservatory. No, as a matter of fact, that's a strange thing. I have a college degree, BA with an emphasis in music. It wasn't a very strong major.
Okay.
Nor minor.
Okay.
It wasn't very strong at the time, and so I felt like I was always just a little behind doing what I should be able to do, what is teaching. And I ad-libbed a lot, and the kids were so delightful, and we found each other that way, mutually, I guess. Whatever. I was very fortunate. Wonderful materials to work with. As time went along, they improved materials for teaching, and I never took a teaching course. Well, I did in the summer there. I mean, one wonderful teaching course, a summer course.
And if I could just make one thing before you close, Barb has been working on a book, on her book, which is her memories of the time with the Trapp family, and it's. I've been reading it. She has really finished the bulk of the writing, and we're going back and doing some revisions. But we're hoping, and she's got lots of pictures to put in it, and lots of really fun memories of all the tours and the various members and
And I
stuff.
should have done this 20
And-
years ago.
Yeah. And so we're hoping to get it published sometime, I hope in the next
Maybe
year.
not. If not, maybe
That's
just.
wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you for enduring all of the halting technological maladies that hit us. And thank you for recouping, Barb, and giving us
Well,
a wonderful tour.
did the best I could. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I love y'all. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for coming.